do you believe that there are moves now to annex North Gaza? Is that, do you think, the goal of the Israeli government at this point?
Of course, I'm not privy to their to their drawers. I wouldn't be surprised if it's, in fact, I'm quite confident it's one of the scenarios that they are thinking about. And you remember, the government still has this messianic settler element in it, despite the fact that they created an emergency government and added some more sober, if you want, Zionist into the decision-making process. These fanatic fundamentalists are still part of the government. They are definitely would like to see the return of Jewish settlers to some parts of Gaza, and definitely hope that this kind of development would allow their return to, for them, this would heal the trauma of the eviction. I don't think that most of those who are involved now in preparing the land invasion in this emergency cabinet are thinking that far. In fact, the sense is that it reminds a little bit the American reaction, you know, in Iraq and Baghdad, Iraq and Afghanistan, when there was a clear sense that there's no planning for the day after. I don't think there's a serious discussion in Israel of the day after. And the whole energy is invested in what they think would be the revenge that would satisfy the Israelis. And somehow they have this idea that they are able to eliminate the Hamas altogether, both from Gaza and from the political scene, which is another heuristic, unrealistic project of Israel.
Emma said that was the last question. I promise this is the last question because it was just spurred by what you said, because in my mind, in terms of Iraq, it wasn't just about a failure to plan for the day after. It was also a delusion as to what happens on day one. And it is hard for me to believe that Hamas did not assume that the Israeli reaction would be to enter into Gaza. And there's an assumption that there is, you know, the Israeli government should do some planning of like what happens once they get rid of Hamas. But that to me seems like a very, very big assumption. Even if you could inhibit somehow the a response of a, you know, sort of a new Hamas coming out of the rubble, just in terms of the existing Hamas, you can go in there with 100,000 troops. It's still not clear to me that you're going to be able to, you know, clear it out, you know, and just eliminate every Hamas fighter, you know, in a matter of months, or, you know, I don't know. I mean, like what is the tolerance of the Israeli society for a failure, I guess, from Netanyahu again? I mean, to see because my sense is there is a clear sort of unified desire for revenge, but also a nearly clear unified response that Netanyahu failed once. And it seems to me that, like, you know, the opportunity for failure based upon expectations is rather high. And that, with a guy like Netanyahu and, you know, the other people that at least made up his ruling coalition, that's a scary scenario, because I think this guy wants to stay in office as much as, you know, Donald Trump wants to get in office to stay out of jail.
Absolutely, and I can really corroborate what you say in something that is now top news in Israel in the last day or two. A group of politicians who are very close to Netanyahu, you can call them members of the Netanyahu political household, have produced a clip that went viral in Israeli networks, which advocates the continuation of bombing from the outside without going in. This cannot be done without Netanyahu's authorization for this clip. He will do all he can, and that's why we don't see yet a land invasion. He will do all he can to delay the invasion or to limit it. The last thing he wants is a full-scale invasion with the possibility of such a large number of Israeli casualties. However, he cannot say it in his own voice. Neither are those who he invited to the government, Gantz and not Ashkenazi, the other guy, Eisenkot, the two ex-generals who they are themselves responsible for some war crimes in Gaza, are willing to accept this idea. So the army is now wishing for a land invasion, wants a land invasion. Some of the so-called more moderate members of his cabinet want a land invasion. Ironically, it's always happened in Bibi. If you look at the history of Israel and Bibi, Bibi is the one who stands between the invasion and its implementation. For all these cynical motivation that you pointed out, staying in power. Nobody would be able to write a biography of Benjamin Netanyahu and have a chapter, the ideology of Netanyahu. There is no ideology. There really is no ideology. There is, who said it? Power for the sake of power is the worst kind of power, and this is exactly what we see here, with all the manipulation and navigation that goes along with it.
Well, okay, promise. What should we what should we be advocating for in terms of our government? I mean, obviously, there was a quote, I think it was in the Times of Israel, by your defense, the equivalent of your defense secretary, Gallant, yes, saying something to the effect of they wanted us to allow, some humanitarian aid in, and what can we do? They give us the guns and the weaponry. And, to some extent, we're told in this country, we don't have that much leverage with Israel, but it's clear that we do, or at least there's who knows the game that's being played back and forth in terms of the way that things are being sold domestically in Israel. But we have some leverage, and what should we be calling for now? Ultimately, an end to the occupation. But is that in calling for an end to the occupation, does it give room for, Israel to say, but first, okay, we'll talk about that after we do this? Or do we say ceasefire? I mean, what is the most helpful thing to be advocating for at this juncture?
Yeah. Well, you can begin with one of the most bizarre speeches I ever heard in my life, when the American representative to the United Nations explained why America vetoed a call for a ceasefire. Why did America say we don't want to stop massive killing of civilians in Gaza? Go over that speech. This is one of the most bizarre speeches I ever heard. It was full of moral argument that if you came out from Mars, you would say, oh, okay, in the end of the speech, this representative would surely call for a ceasefire, end of hostilities. And the concluding remark of this speech was, and therefore we veto the call for a ceasefire, which is, I've never heard it before. Even in American politics had some absurd speeches in its history. This was the worst kind. Now, secondly, after calling for a ceasefire, calling for exchange of prisoners, of course. I don't think at this moment the international community should commit itself for being the mediator or facilitator of a solution or reconciliation, but at least inject some humanity and sensibility and common sense into the situation. However you want to show your horror, and that's understandable, of what happened on the Saturday of the 7th of October, you cannot lose the big picture. There were 7th of October done to the Palestinians throughout their histories. nobody should take here the high moral ground, but a responsible international community knows that it has the leverage, by the way, on both sides, to bring an end, first of all, to this massive killing, and then to exchange of prisoners. And if you want genuinely to go for reconciliation, include everyone who's involved. Don't have a club where you decide who can join and who cannot join. Anybody who's a Palestinian, anyone who's Israeli, needs to be part of this discussion. You cannot exclude anyone. But I don't think that's what the international community wants. The international community hopes to get to some sort of a status quo which it can tolerate and contain. And with this I would end. People in Palestine watch the international community reaction to the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. And they don't see that kind of response to the Russian invasion. The Russian invasion was, from door to door, wall to wall, this reaction, this condemnation, this almost arming the other side in order to stand against the invasion. The idea that you can sort of play with the lives now of people in Gaza, and by the way, also with the lives of people in Israel, because Hezbollah might be drugged in if this continues, or other actors might dragged in. So you cannot really contain the human disaster into one border, and it's unforgivable that the international community is now not focusing on ending the firepower of Israel and creating conducive conditions to a different kind of a dialogue. How long it will take, it doesn't matter, as long as it is a dialogue of words and not the dialogue of bombs or rockets on both sides.
Ilan Pappe, professor of history at the University of Exeter, director of the European Center for Palestine Studies, author of the 10 Myths About Israel, and many more. We will link to all of those in our podcast and YouTube description. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate your allowing us to continue to question you.
One more, right?
Thank you so much.
Thank you both, Emma and Sam. I really enjoyed our time together. Thank you very much.
Thank you.